Welcome. Welcome to the Grid Podcast, bringing truths and awareness to America's fragile critical infrastructure. On our first episode, we have a stellar guest panel of industry thought leaders, Jonathan Hollerman and Mike Poynter. Together, we'll explore how our electrical grid, water, sewer systems, and other critical infrastructure to our country is exposed and has evolving threats against it each and every day. So welcome, Jonathan. Welcome, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and say a quick intro for the two of you. Jonathan Hollerman is the Deputy Executive Director for Task Force on National and Homeland Security. Jonathan currently sits on executive leadership, board of director, and advisory roles in multiple organizations, fighting to harden our nation's critical infrastructure against all hazards. He is the world's foremost expert and literally wrote the book on the psychological and physiological effects of starvation after a long-term collapse event. Jonathan is a #1 best-selling author, and he works alongside the nation's leading experts on exposing the devastating effects of high energy HEMP and corona mass injections, and cyber threats and physical security threats to our grid. So welcome, Jonathan. And we have Mike Poynter, who is the Task Force Chair, Household and Community Readiness. Mike has over 40 years of distinguished public service experience, having led operations and emergency personnel across a wide range of critical environments. His expertise spans all major branches of emergency services, including law enforcement, EMS, and fire services. His operational excellence includes his service as a tactical paramedic with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Special Weapons team, and as a flight paramedic at a Level 1 trauma center. So welcome, gentlemen. How are you today?
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks,
Maria. It's great to be here.
Well, today we're going to be discussing, it's going to be free-flowing. I'm going to let, I guess we'll start alphabetically. We'll let Jonathan go first, but we're going to be talking about the threats to the energy grid. Are you prepared or scared? What are your thoughts?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
You can never be fully prepared for this type of event. I do not live my life in fear. I'm a Christian man, so there is nothing that I fear. However, this is a topic that is very serious. This is a topic that most Americans are not completely aware of. They don't understand that at any moment, your faucet could stop working, your lights could stop working, electricity completely goes out, the grocery store is empty of food. So it is something to be concerned about. But as far as scared, I do not live my life in fear.
Mike, what are your initial thoughts on prepared or scared?
My
personal opinion, I sort of concur with Jonathan. I feel like I am prepared enough for our family, but there's so many variables and so many circumstances that we could see. I really think that the public as a whole is we're complacent, and we think every time we turn that light switch on, it's going to come on. And what happens if it doesn't? So I really try to, and I'm not going to use the word prepare, but maybe just be ready for different situations.
There's so many things going on. I just think it's so important for the general public to be thinking about different situations like that.
Yeah, it looks like we have a little bit of a mic issue. I'm reading some of the chat, so I welcome those who have joined us in the chat. Welcome to the Grid Podcast. I have switched off the echo cancellation. Is that a bit better? I hope so. I'd like to talk about what what are your thoughts on the current state of the grid? If you had to rate the grid on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being poor, 5 being excellent, where would you rate that?
So as far as rating the grid, it's difficult because there's a lot of variables. There are physical threats, like how secure is the grid. That would be very low. Physical security is exceptionally low at most high voltage substations. In a lot of cases, there's nothing more than a chain link fence and some barbed wire, maybe a broken camera or two that are keeping an eye on the substation. So physical security is woefully substandard for the electric grid. If we're talking as the general grid, as the entire thing combined, the problem is we're operating at peak physical or peak demand for the grid. So we don't have much room for error. And there's a lot of spinning mass in the grid, and we're taking coal power plants down and we're replacing them with which are not as reliable, especially when it's cloudy outside. So yeah, we are getting into a position where we have AI data centers coming on board. More people are buying electric cars. The amount of electricity we can produce is not going to meet the demand in the very near future. So on that side of it, it gets a failing grade as well.
How about you, Mike?
I would agree. And with the growing AI, I've been trying to keep up with some of the statistics on that. And just like Jonathan said, we're not going to meet the demand in the very near future of what's needed to produce that. And along with that, the actual grid itself, we've got, the Eastern, Western, and Texas. This was made so many years ago, and it's so fragile. There's so many breaking points, in my opinion, and Jonathan would probably be more of a subject matter expert on that. But just what I've researched is, that we could have breakdowns just like we did in New York years ago. And, with a fallen tree that hit a line in Ohio and shut down a major part of the East Coast. So that's what concerns me most, is just what we don't know.
Right. Now, I come from the cybersecurity aspect of grid of basically critical infrastructure security, and what I've seen, especially during my time in New York City, that there's been very little movement by our elected officials to do anything to harden our grid. What has your experience been in presenting and going to our leadership in this country and making them aware of the state of our grid?
So we've had the opportunity to meet, not just myself personally. Maria, you were with me last year, and Glenn Rhodes when we met with Mike Waltz. I've met with Ted Cruz and Scott Perry and quite a few different congressmen, people from our other organizations similar to ours, like Security Grid Coalition. I know, Tommy Waller, General Ken Krosniak, who's part of our organization. They met with Trump in his last administration. So this really isn't a political issue. I like to say that a total grid down collapse and the calamity that would follow is an equal opportunity destroyer and killer, right? So it doesn't care about the color of your skin whenever the lights go out. But we have, since 2004, the Congressional EMP Commission has been warning Congress that as many as 90% of Americans would be dead within the first year from disease, starvation, societal unrest, violence, and little to nothing has been done. So this is 5 administrations now that have not fixed the problem. So when we say hardening the grid, it is a complicated thing to discuss. Hardening the grid. Are we talking about the generation? Are we talking about distribution, transmission? There's a lot of moving parts here. And so the thing is because it's a big problem, our government has largely instead of tackling the problem and putting experts like those from our organizations and similar organizations to fight to come at this task, it's been easier for them to put out junk science and to bury their head in the sand and pretend the problem does not exist. And that does not do anything for the American people. So if we continue to kick the can down the road and pretend like this problem doesn't exist, it's going to be a massive loss of life in this country when one of these events do happen.
Mike?
And I would agree with Jonathan. I really said, and I mentioned this earlier, is I feel like the general public is so complacent. We're so used to having so many things. If we look back, if we had a grid down situations, we would technically be back in the 1800s. They survived. They could survive. They did survive, but they adapted to what they needed. They didn't have electricity back then. So, that's something that I sort of look into in my area of which I'm doing research in, and how did they survive, and what would we have to do if we did have that scenario of a grid down situation? It's for an hour or 2 or 6 hours or 12. Some people will probably think that's fun. We can light candles and listen to the radio. What happens when it's 36 hours, 72, a week, a month? That really changes. And usually after just a few days, that's when you start seeing civil unrest. So what I've been focusing on is, when this happens, what do we do then?
Right. And one puzzle piece that seems to be missing is that the electrical grid powers our water. And people don't make that connection. So when the grid goes down, so after a while, so does the ability not only to pump fresh water, especially in large cities that have high rises, but as well as, you have the reclaimed water or reclaimed water, recycled water, and the lack to be able to process that water. And what happens to that after, in a big city like New York City, even within 36 hours? What's going to happen when none of that wastewater can be treated? And I think people fail to see that the two are very interconnected. And when the power goes out, we will have a situation on our hands for an extended period of time where fresh water and the proper disposal of or recycling of our wastewater just won't be happening. What are your thoughts? I mean, you've been in this for a while. What are the thoughts that the two industries are still very sort of living in their own silos, and they don't realize, especially the water to the electrical to the water, they don't realize that they're dependent, that the population of this country is dependent on the two of them working together.
Sure. So we'll start with water and sewer, and that is a good place to start because, you can survive for a certain amount of time without food and without shelter, but without water, you're not going to last very long. So the problem with the water situation is without electricity, the water doesn't function. And if you live out in the country like I do on a homestead, unless you have the ability to create 220 electric, most well pumps are 220 electric. So you're not even going to be able to get water out of your home well unless you have a hand pump on it. So these are things that people just don't consider. They just have taken for granted that when you turn that faucet on, there's always going to be crystal clear, purified water coming out of that faucet. And if you take away water, the next thing is septic. You alluded to it as well. If you're in a low-lying area in a city, some of the studies I've looked at is once that wastewater treatment facility shuts down and it basically starts to overflow, it'll overflow likely. Typically, they put these next to a river or next to a body of water. So if you're thinking about getting water from the river, you might want to reconsider that if you've got a city upstream from you. And then as people continue flushing or continue pouring water down their tub or getting water from another source and pouring down the drain, that creates pressure in those pipes. If you're in a low-lying section of a city, there's a good chance that you could have raw sewage backing up into your house through your drains and through your sinks and stuff like that, and you're not going to be able to stop it unless you have that 10-foot rod to go out to the road and manually shut the septic off out at the road. So those are just two things to consider. So even if we're looking at hardening these facilities, you still have the downstream, both water and septic need chemicals to arrive at those facilities. And so the factories that create those chemicals need to function. The interstate trucking that delivers the chemicals to those facilities need to function. And that's just talking about two of our critical infrastructures. All 16 of our critical infrastructures in this country require electricity to function. So in the scheme of things, nothing works. Mike did a great job of explaining it. It's kind of like a continental time machine. We go back 200 years ago. Unfortunately, we do not have the life skills as a society to live without electricity. We don't have the general knowledge of what it takes to survive and how not to drink dirty water, which is going to create all kinds of diseases and things that we've never really considered living in the richest country in the world.
Yeah. Mike, what's your experience, especially with emergency management?
Yeah,
water.
It's interesting. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I've had the opportunity to be deployed all over North America and some other parts of the world too on some major events. And usually the first thing that we have concerns with is water and basically hygiene. And I'm considering long-term operations here. And Jonathan said that very well. That's something you don't think about. Something, also, if you have a grid down situation and you have a lot of precipitation, like a lot of rain, or if you're a hurricane or, wind, the rain actually pushes the sewage out faster in the drainage system. So, if something that I go out and talk with folks, if you turn on the national news each night, I could almost guarantee you that one of the first three stories is going to be about a man-made or natural disaster of some sort. And, that's something that we're just trying to get people to think about that more, about what if this happened, what would we do? How could we deal with this? But yes, water is one of the most critical elements that we need. We can go without food for a number of days, but that's something that's one of our top priorities, is trying to have a plan for your family, for your neighborhood sometimes, about how to, have good, clean water.
Right. Now, you mentioned something really interesting, Jonathan, is the backing up of the sewer systems into people's homes. So if it gets bad enough, would this render your home unlivable at some point if there was an extended outage?
Absolutely. If you have raw sewage pulling up in your basement and in your bathroom and you cannot stop, it's not like you can just shove a rag down in there and stop it. That creates a methane problem in your house, and it does make your house unlivable. It could make 10-20% of the houses in the low-lying areas of any major city completely unlivable. But not just that, we talked about lack of water. Well, fire hydrants need water in order to function. They need water pressure in order to function. So can you imagine if, something like this happens in the winter? I live in a northern climate, and you have people that don't have those basic survival skills. They're freezing. It's, freezing temperatures in their house, and they bring, a charcoal grill inside to try and heat their living room, right? To keep their kids warm at night, or they try and build a fire, or they do something silly and they catch their house on fire. I lived in Pittsburgh for a bunch of years. Old cities. I mean, you could, if a fire starts in a house and it catches to the next house and then the next house, you could lose entire portions of cities in firestorms because we don't have firefighters to come and stop them. So that's another thing to consider. There's a lot of things to consider that are outside the realm of we just take for granted that there's always going to be police there that are going to come when there's violence. There's always going to be firefighters that come put the fire out. There's always going to be EMS if there's an emergency situation. The hospitals don't function. The hospitals don't work. Where do you go to get medical care if you're sick or if you're hurt? So these are all things that go away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And that's something that, that's a good point, John. And that's something that I'm a firm believer in, just, training or just a checklist, preparing. Unfortunately, I've gone to a number of fatalities where somebody had they had a grid down situation. They started up a generator in their garage, and basically it was succumbed of, carbon monoxide. Yep. They didn't know. They said, well, here's a generator. Let's plug it up. It'll work. It'll run the stove or something. But, then they find them, the next day and, they're deceased. So that's where we really need to have a plan ahead. And that's, that's where we, it's not going to, there's not one solution for this problem, but we have to take, a different area each time. Like when people ask me about, well, how much food should I have in the house? Well, I don't know. I don't know where you live, if you live in the city or the country, how close you are to a grocery. If the grid goes down, the groceries will be clean in about, 48 to 72 hours, they'll be done. But, allot $5 a week to go out and buy groceries and just stick back, a can of corn, some pasta or something like that for a rainy day. So that's where I'm really trying to push the education, is just trying to think ahead about the what ifs.
Jonathan, what are your thoughts on just having sufficient water and food? What would your recommendations be around that?
So that is correct, but we also have to look at what type of grid down event we're speaking of. If it's a cyber or a localized physical event, where it only maybe takes down a portion of the grid and the rest of the country's up and somebody's coming to help and FEMA's on the way 3 days later, that's one scenario. If we're talking about a high altitude EMP attack or a CME or another major situation that destroys a lot of our high voltage transformers, which we can talk about here in a minute, and how long it takes to replace those, it's highly likely we're going to be without power for over a year. So if you are the only person, if you live in an urban environment, if you live in the city or even the suburban environment, in fact, 70% of the Americans live in the city or the suburbs of a city of over 1 million people. If you're in a high mass populated area and you have a whole bunch of food and water and supplies stocked up and you've got a backup generator and you're cranking that thing out, it is not going to take very long. And I mean days, possibly a week or two, for all your neighbors to figure out that you're the only one not getting skinny. You're the only one not flipping out over this. You're your generator makes noise. People talk about gardening in their backyard. All these things, you're outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a hard time maintaining those supplies. So I always recommend if you live in an urban environment, if you're going to stock up on things, stock up at your Uncle Bob's farm somewhere in rural America, or have a plan not to stay in mass population centers, because that's the biggest threat. You can figure out water, you can figure out shelter in 90% of the case. The problem you run into is food and other people, and those are combined. So when the grocery stores are empty 3 days later, they're never getting resupplied. Interstate trucking's down. The factories are down. The distribution networks are down. The computer that combines all that stuff's down. So when the grocery stores are empty 3 days, if you fast forward a week or 2 weeks and people are actually functionally starting to starve, I wrote a 122-page white paper on this called Grid Down Deaths of a Nation. You can download it for free from the EMP Task Force website. When people run out of fear, there's a thing called starvation psychosis. They go crazy. They literally go crazy. And if you are stuck in the middle of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of starving, desperate, crazy people, that's your number one threat. And, I know I live in West Virginia on a homestead. I'm all about guns and protection, and all that is great, but no house is completely defensible. I mean, it's a matter of time till a bigger group comes. So my advice that I recommend is that have a plan of action for your family that does not involve trying to survive in the middle of a mass population center when everybody's going nuts.
Yeah, I agree. Mike?
I think that brings up a really good point, and you touched on this, Jonathan. If this is a regional event and you're fairly well stocked up for a few days, probably you'll be okay. If this is a national event, I'm afraid the outcome's not going to be good, and I'm just going to be honest with that, because that's when, like Jonathan said, people just go crazy. They'll do whatever it takes, and especially if you're in an urban area, no home is invincible. We do have a plan. I've got a plan B. Plan A is to try to stay home if we can. I live in Lexington, Kentucky, which is about 200,000 people, but we have another off-site facility about an hour away, which is on about 3,000 acres of raw land. So we've got some supplies set up remotely. Problem could be, how do we get there? If it's an EMP, our vehicle is going to work. Well, who knows? There's so many different scenarios and what could happen. It's just really hard to say. If you do this, you'll be okay. You can't really say that.
Yeah, Maria, just if I could add just one more point. What neither me or Mike are advocating is going and living off the land, right? We're not advocating that you go like the Legend of Mick Dodge and you go try and live in the national forest. I'm a former SERE instructor, survival, evasion, resistance, escape instructor, and that would be really, really difficult for me. And even if you could convince me you have the life skills to do that sort of thing, you were left on the side of the road in Alaska as a child and raised by a pack of wolves, and you actually have those life skills. You can't convince me of the other 99% of the yahoos running around the same patch of woods you are that don't have the life skills, that haven't eaten in 2 or 3 weeks and are willing to take a pot shot at you and kill you to dig through your pack and see if you got a can of beans in there. So we're not advocating for that. So what it comes down to is having a plan of action. And, we're talking about heavy stuff here, and the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people is to run out and just buy stuff. Buy a 1-year food plan from one of the big outlets that offer 1-year food plan. By the way, it's probably about 3 months worth of calories. But anyways, they'll just run out and start throwing money at the problem. Before you start spending a dime, you need to, in my opinion, the most important thing is educate yourself. Educate yourself on what this environment looks like. Any general that's making a plan to take a battlefield wants to know all the details of the environment he's heading into. And I would say educate yourself on a grid down environment and what that looks like. Over my shoulder here, got a bunch of books, Red Famine. Buy some books, some firsthand accounts, Mao's famine, the Holodomor, the Chinese famine, the Warsaw ghettos. Look at firsthand accounts of what it was like for these people to survive and what it took for them to make it through. Build a solid plan of action before you start throwing money at something. And I mean, it really stinks. I mean, there's so many people that I've talked to that like, oh, I put, a $20,000 generator behind my house, and then you find out where their house is, and it's like, that's going to be pretty noisy with a lot of people around you, right? So be smart, make a plan of action, and then build on that.
And David Moran in the chat mentioned something that I'm an advocate of, especially, is resilient communities, because we can't all do anything, but together collectively, I could have 20 pounds of rice. My neighbor could have, 20 pounds of lentils, and we could have one person with the ham radio. Another thing is communication, knowing what is going on in the outside world. But if you bring your community together and find out who the doctors and nurses are in your community, in first aid, things like that, because you're going to have to be self-reliant for an extended period of time if the whole country, if the whole grid goes down. And we're not being fear, we're not putting this out there as fear. We want we want Americans to realize that this is a possibility, and it's a very high possibility, if not a probability, that this will happen in our lifetimes. So that's why we started this podcast, and we have many industry experts that are going to come on here and try to educate Americans, and we hope that other countries come to here as well, because it's just not us. This possibility exists in around the world, and what it is you need to be prepared, because the people in Poland and prior to World War II probably never thought that things were probably pretty bad there, but they would have never thought that things would have happened the way they happened. And but you need to be prepared, and that's what we're trying to really communicate and give you ideas, give you resources of how you can prepare not only your families but your communities as well.
I think that's a really good point, Maria, and something I want to throw out there too is I get asked a lot of that. What should I pack? What should I keep in the house, or what should I keep in the vehicle? Well, there's not a right answer for that. It really depends on so many things. So here's a good example. It's the 1st of October. I'm here in Kentucky. It's mid 70s, high 70s. I just came back from northern Wisconsin, which the mornings, they're already getting some frost up there. So I want everybody to think about the climate. Summertime, it's not too bad, but if it's below zero, how are you going to have your supplies set up any different? Your clothing, your vehicles. What do you have in your vehicle if you have a problem and your vehicle quits? Are you going to go home? Are you going to go somewhere else? Just having that plan of action about what to do in a different scenario. So, the geography and the weather patterns, I think that's definitely something to take in consideration.
Yes, I agreed.
Yeah, there is no be wary of the one size fits all approaches that you see a lot of times on YouTube channels. The top 5 this for that, and the top 10 this for that, the top 5 packs for bugging out, the top 10 guns for survival. It's like, well, there's a lot of factors here you have to take in consideration. Like Mike mentioned, every family's different. How big's your family? Are you hiking in Arizona? Or are you hiking in Maine? Is it winter? Is it summer? There's so many variables. There is no easy cut and dry, clear cut answer for a lot of these problems. That is why I said, educating yourself and then you making a plan of action for your family that fits best for your family.
Yeah.
And you said something, John, it brought up just a quick story. Is like, I was out talking with a group not too long ago, and we're just talking about, well, I saw this on YouTube, and it said, this is what I need to do. Well, it just because it's on YouTube doesn't mean it's valid. Anybody can put a YouTube video up and say, hey, this is a top 5, and that's a good point, Jonathan. So if I can say anything, don't believe everything you see on YouTube.
That is very true. And I think that's why we as a collective group of organizations, a foundation for infrastructure resiliency, the task force on homeland security, and many others have started collaborating together to see if what we can do as a group. Because greater is a threefold cord than a single cord. But
and Maria, that's a good point. You mentioned it earlier. Is working with your community, your neighbors. Everybody doesn't specialize in everything, and having the resources that takes a mental and a physical load off of each individual. So I think that's really important.
Right, and you're gonna, when you reach out to your neighbors, you're gonna figure out, and this is really important, and I've read Jonathan's book, so you're going to know the personalities of your neighbors, and you're going to know the ones who will crack quickly under pressure, and I don't know a better way to describe them. The ones who are cowardice, and then you're going to have your leaders, and those are the people that you really want to work with and get into a sort of, I'm setting up a what happens if we're on our own and law enforcement doesn't respond. What are we going to do? Because let me tell you, you're going to run into these situations on an extended grid down situation. And I think Jonathan can talk more about that than I can. I just read his books. So.
Well, it is, if we look at those that crossed the Great Divide and the pioneers of this country that moved west to Oklahoma and settled Kansas and Nebraska, we've seen the Westerns, we've seen how difficult, Little House on the Prairie, how difficult it was for a single family unit to make enough food and to make enough to live off of for an entire year. And they had access to a general store that actually sold, horse-drawn plows and 50-pound bags of salt and things that you just can't get readily today from your local Dollar General. So they had life skills and they had access to tools and supplies that you're not going to have. So it's going to be really hard as a single family unit. So I agree that it's really important to try and have, or at least partner with a larger group, people with other skills. Maria mentioned a doctor earlier, a mechanic, somebody with some tactical experience. I agree with all of that. The only caution I would throw out there is at the end of the day, the only thing you're not going to be able to get is more food. So if you're forming a group, you do not grow your group beyond what you can feed. If you can't feed a large group and you form a large group a month into that event, you're going to last longer than everybody else. But at some point, that same group's going to eat through all the food, eat through all your food. And then you're going to be in a very similar boat. So I have this conversation with clients all the time. And, they tell me, I've got 2 years worth of food for my family. And then you start talking about the group size and they're like, well, we got 30 people. I'm like, well, that 2 years worth of food, if nobody else is buying food and you're the only one that's put food away, they're eating through your food in like a week or two, right? So, or 2 or 3 weeks. So these are all things, again, planning, thinking ahead, and considering all your options and where to go and who to join forces with. I would just, again, I've seen, again, going back to the internet and YouTube and the old show Doomsday Prepper, whose actual business model was to make preppers look like crazy people. Let's just put that out there. But I mean, if you go through a lot of the internet stuff, they're going to teach you how to survive in your high-rise apartment building in downtown Harrisonburg and give you a 9-star rating on your preparedness journey. So I would just caution people against believing everything they hear and being wise with the decisions you're going to make. But all this stuff, so we're really focusing on the personal side of it. At the Grid Podcast here, speak with Maria. We want to, this isn't just going to be fear mongering. That was the word she was searching for here a minute ago, I think. We want to provide solutions as well. And there are so many things that Mike and myself and Maria and Glenn and all the 60 members of our organization, there's things that we're fighting. And we're trying very hard to get the government to respond and get them to act, take this threat seriously. But at the end of the day, you need to be prepared for the event that they're not going to, or they're not going to do it correctly, or they're not going to do it fully. So you have to take this stuff we're talking about seriously. Don't ignore it and just hang your hat that the government or the military or FEMA or somebody's going to roll in there and feed you and take care of you after an event like this.
Yeah.
I've actually witnessed that in a pretty major event where FEMA didn't have boots on the ground until about 5 or 6 days after the actual event. So, that's a very good point to press is, don't rely and I'm not saying anything bad about the government. Don't get me wrong, but don't rely on that as a survival tool. You've got to rely on yourself. And something I wanted to bring up just real quick and get your thoughts on it, Jonathan. I spend a lot of time out in the woods, and with other groups and classes and things like that. But the mindset on any situation, your mindset is one of the most important tools you have. What's your thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah. So as a SERE instructor, I mean, that's one of the core things we push on our students. Pilots, navigators, special operations guys that might get shot down in the mountains or get shot down behind enemy lines. You can completely win or lose your battle with the elements right up here in your brain. So there was a story of a bush pilot up in Alaska. I think this was back in the 70s, but he was hired to drop some hunters off, and on their trip they decided to hunt a different area. So he changed course, dropped them off in a different area than what he had kind of registered and had told his boss where he was going to be, flew to a different area, and then crash landed in a lake on the way back. And he was completely in the middle of nowhere, and he was way off course from where anybody would even think to be searching for him. And so he swam to shore from this pond or this lake and lit a fire and put a gun in his mouth and did something very awful. And a plane flew over, saw the tail sticking out of the lake like 4 hours later. It was within that day they had shown up there, and he had started a fire. And you can win or lose this battle in your brain. So this goes back to knowledge, and prior planning. Mm-hmm. If you have a plan that you can execute, you're going to feel a lot more confident. When something like this happens, if you can grab your go bag, you already have counter scenarios to scenarios, and you have a plan of action, you're going to feel a lot more confident in what you need to do. You can start issuing instructions right away to the rest of your family members and get them moving. They're going to see your confidence, and it's going to keep your children from being scared because dad or mom knows what's happening. They've got it taken care of. This is, people are in the streets acting crazy, but mom and dad aren't, right? Mm-hmm. So mindsets, having a plan of action, prior knowledge, all these things go hand in hand together. And, again, I'm just going to throw another shameless plug for Jesus. I mean, as a Christian or a faith, religion, whatever, there are things that you can latch onto and know that regardless of what happens, there's a better place for me. So,
yep. For God has given us, it does not give us the fear, the spirit of fear, but that of power, love, and a sound mind. And that comes from God. You're absolutely correct.
And I'll say amen to that. Yes, I agree.
There's a good question in the chat from Terry Hill. It says, what does the panel think we should be doing now to harden the grid? And is there an opportunity to take a clean slate approach to this?
I'll let you go first, Mike.
Oh, I knew you was going to do that.
I'll give you the difficult questions first.
No, and that's fine. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. As for the physical grid itself and how it's constructed and the parts involved, I don't know. I'm not the subject matter expert on that specific topic. I've been focusing on, what happens if it does go down. So, I'm going to be perfectly honest and say, I can't say that if we did this, it would be more secure, but I know on the FER team, we've got some subject matter experts that could answer that easily, and that might be a good guest appearance for a future podcast.
There you go.
That's a good question, though. I wish I had the answer.
So I am not the subject matter expert on building an electric grid for America from scratch, but I have stayed in a Holiday Inn with quite a few of them, had a lot of long discussions with them. So there's a lot of solutions out there. As far as like, hey, we need to go from an AC grid to a DC grid. I've heard of microgrids. We've talked of chopping up the grid into smaller pieces other than the three that it's in now, the Eastern Interconnect, Western Interconnect, and the Texas grid. There are a lot of ideas as far as the clean slate approach, but by golly, unless you're going to follow suit with what some politicians have said about completely taking over and federalizing all the electric grid companies, which I think would probably be a pretty dramatic step, they're never going to follow suit. Mm-hmm. It's about power and it's about money. And I don't even mean that in an evil sense. All big business is about, at the end of the day, it's about their stockholders and the bottom dollar. We have been, like I said, trying to get the electric grids to harden the grid on their own for the last 20 years. They have no interest in spending the money or opening Pandora's box and having the federal government come in and oversee hardening of the grid. They think it's not their problem. They think it's the government's problem. So if we're talking about like a clean slate approach, I know there's some very optimistic people that talk about completely rebuilding the grid, but it is the largest machine in the world. It is exceptionally complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. There's probably 1,000 different companies involved. They'd all have to be on board. They'd all have to agree with the same solution to the problem. I don't foresee that kind of kicking everything off with this clean slate. I think we have to deal with the hand that we're dealt, and we can discuss it more. I'm not sure how deep we'll go, but I mean, there's organizations, there's NERC and there's FERC and there's the Department of Energy. There's a lot of different people that are involved in this situation. The thing that really needs to be done is we need somebody to be the adult in the room, grab everybody by the ear and by the collar and put them around the table and say, okay, these are very serious, real threats to the American public. And we need to find a solution and actually start talking like that instead of trying to hide from the problem, to deceive people about the legitimacy of the problem or minimize it.
And with all respect, and I don't mean to be negative about our government, but our politicians can't even agree on a budget. If you watch the news today, I mean, how could we convince them of, improving the grid?
Yeah, and the electric utility lobby is the second largest lobbyist at the federal government. They're bigger than big oil. Only pharmaceuticals spend more lobbying money in D.C. than the electric utilities. So they have exceptional amount of power. I mean, I don't even remember. I'm not even 10 years ago, whenever it was. I met with Trent Franks, who's no longer in Congress, but talking about the SHIELD Act, and it's just amazing. Like, they put we've had 4 or 5 really good kind of bills looking at hardening the grid that have been to Congress, none lately, but they get killed in committee. They never make it out of committee. Both sides, and this is, like I said, it's not a political issue. Both sides of the aisle, every single one of them just about take money from the electric utility lobby. So these are all parts of the puzzle that we're going to have to figure out and get around. We need to get, we need to get the president and his immediate cabinet, a president and their immediate cabinet, to step up and light a fire under some people and kick them in the pants and tell them to get moving on this.
Yeah. What I know of, and I'm not an expert in that area too, as well, but what I do see, and it's more from a cybersecurity perspective, is, and this can transition us to talk about the transformers, is the supply chain within the electrical grid itself, and the fact that because it is run by private industry and they answer to their shareholders, they look for, as any business would, the best deal out there. And right now that tends to be coming from Asian countries, which are adversarial towards the United States. And because of that, the supply chain is incredibly, and I can't think of another word, infested with vulnerabilities from a cybersecurity perspective. And because of that, we don't know the level of infiltration. It's most likely very deep. And I know because I've actually had a briefing on it. So do you want to add anything to the overall supply chain for the electrical grid, and as well as any other aspects of vulnerabilities?
Sure. So our high voltage transformers, these are very large pieces of equipment that the the electric grid must have in the system to function. Step up and step down transformers, some of them weigh over 400 tons. High voltage transformers right now, we only replace about a dozen of them a year, and they take about 3 years. That's the current lead time right now for a high voltage transformer is 3 years, and most of them come from South Korea or Germany. And if we lose a bunch of them or all of them in a hemp or a lot of them, in any case, you're not getting that first transformer for 3 years onto our shores. So this is a very big national security issue. And I've seen C-SPAN, I've seen congressmen, I've seen them talking about it, and they've been talking about it for a long time. And I know they're pushing for building factories in the U.S. Like, I know, we actually build something that we use here in our own country. They're talking about building factories here and getting back to U.S. production. And that's great and all, but if we have a nationwide grid down event and none of the factories have power, we're not going to be able to make them ourselves anyway. But you mentioned, this critical infrastructure and large transformers coming from Asian countries. Maria, we can just say it. China is where they're coming from. Okay. So the CCP, the communist Chinese government, entered the market for transformers here about 10, 12 years ago. And they started undercutting all their competition by like 20, 30%. Utilities, like you said, it's about the bottom dollar. Hey, there's cheaper transformers. We can buy them from them. We won't go into detail because I think we're getting low on time here. But there's a very big security problem. We know for a fact on record that at least the one company, the big company that sold hundreds and hundreds of transformers into our country that have installed into our electric grid, we confiscated one under the previous Trump administration, sent it to Sandia National Laboratory, and public record, they said that transformer had the ability to basically shut it off remotely from China at any point in time. And there were other major issues with that transformer and to this day, we're still putting these Chinese transformers for the same company into our grid. Nobody stopped it. And it's just the height of insanity. And this is the stuff we're dealing with the federal government and the utilities is somebody made a comment in here that it's not about saving lives. It's about the bottom dollar. That's the nature of it.
That is very true. There's another good comment here to add, and this is very true as well. To add fuel to the fire, the urgency for AI data centers and how they're being planned, and the huge electrical draw, not just electrical, but water. People don't realize lots of water as well. And as is right now, our grid cannot sustain that. Neither can our water without taking that or away from the people. And there's really no backup. I know the current administration was talking about nuclear power, but who wants a nuclear power plant in their backyard? So it's an interesting. Without getting political, I'll let you go, Mike.
That's one thing that makes me really nervous is the explosive growth of data centers.
Yep.
Just in the last, 18 months to 2 years, and the massive amount of energy it takes, both electrical and hydro or water, the cooling process. I don't know what to think. I mean, I'm trying to get factual information. And of course, once again, we can't believe everything we see on the news, but that's one thing that makes me really uneasy moving forward, even with the current problem with the grid we have. So what's your comments on that, guys?
Well, we've got to create electricity to meet the demand. That's all there is to it. These AI data centers have other security issues with them as well, but I mean, you might as well hold back the wind. So are we not going to build AI data centers? Is that the solution? Yeah, China and India and Russia and Europe will run over us in 3 years. You have to keep up with them. There are no easy solutions. Nuclear is an easier solution, but like Maria just mentioned, nobody wants one in the backyard either, right? There are coal power plants, big, reliable coal power plants, natural gas power plants, reliable, lots of spinning mass in the grid. That's what we need. But instead, it seems like everybody's focused on green energy and building windmills and solar power, solar panels. And I'm not saying there's not a place or a time for that in the future, but as of right now, if we don't meet the demand, we're going to start seeing rolling blackouts in this country. There's going to be bigger issues in the near future if we don't meet the rising demand for electricity.
I think it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, we've got issues and concerns either way, if we do or don't. So,
yep, that's very true. And the green, that's a whole nother discussion on its own. But the viability of green energy to actually provide the electrical, not just for the population of the people, but I don't believe it can generate enough for a data center to run a data center, especially some of these very huge data centers. So I'm getting it. I don't know why. There we go. Here we go. Are you guys getting an echo? No?
Yeah, you're echoing, Maria.
Yeah, I'm not sure why.
Yeah, you're
okay.
We were good there for a while.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just did it on its own. You never know with this software. Maybe we touched an area that no one wants us to go into right now. But green energy. Anyway, green energy.
Speaking of China.
Yeah.
It's the AI watching us.
The algorithms. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much more. In sort of wrapping it up here, each one of you, what would be your recommendations to the general public on how to get themselves, Jonathan mentioned a great point, spiritually prepared, because you will not make it through this without a solid foundation in something greater than yourself. In other words, God. You really need that. But in general, in the physical world, what would your recommendations be?
Yeah, so my company, Grid Down Consulting, my company motto is prepare for the worst, hope for the best, let God do the rest, right? So there's so many plans and so many things you can make, but at the end of the day, you have to rely on God to get you through. But he also wants us to use our mind, and if we see a flood coming, to get our family away. If we see a forest fire coming, drive your family out of the danger zone, and don't be silly. So we see the warning signs, we see the threats that are coming to this country. They're serious. I've got young children. We're living in times that I'm not sure what to expect for my kids and what kind of life they're going to have. So at the end of the day, what you can do, one, talk to your friends and family. There's a great documentary called Grid Down Power Up. You can go to griddownpowerup.com. You can watch it on YouTube for free. It's a 1-hour documentary. It is a great icebreaker to this situation. It's a great icebreaker that will quickly show you exactly what we're talking about. Once you break the ice and you start thinking outside the box, I mean, for the last 10,000 years of human history, people had root cells. I mean, they had to store up food to get them through the next harvest season. That was a natural part of life. Today, everybody just relies on going to the grocery store every 3 days and buying food. So think outside the box. Think outside of the norm and just your assumption that everything's always going to keep functioning like it is today, because that's not necessarily true. So have a plan of action. Like I said, I recommend these books back here. I've written some books. There's a great book. The number one recommendation is Selko Begovich, The Dark Secrets of SHTF Survival. He's a man that actually lived through a year-long grid-down collapse in a modern city, and read the horrors and the things he experienced. Educate yourself on what this looks like, gain knowledge, and then build a plan of action, and then throw money at it. And at the last thing, we do not operate preparedness out of fear. We operate preparedness out of responsibility and a duty to our family and our loved ones. So I'm not telling you to go cash in your kids' college fund and throw it all into long-term food and a generator. I'm saying be wise, be a good steward of the money that you have available to you. But make this part of your daily budget. The last thing I'll say is the best analogy that I use typically is it's an insurance policy for your family and their life. Everybody that I know has a fire insurance. They have car insurance, house insurance, flood insurance. You got insurance on your electronics. You got dental insurance, health. It's good on the list. If you actually looked at it all, you probably own 15 or 20 different insurance policies from big to small. And every one of those is for a rainy day. Every one of those insurance policies is like, hey, if the worst thing happens, I have this to protect me or to financially to keep me safe. Well, the same can be said of this. I mean, if you look at just a high altitude EMP or just like if you get laser focus on one set of problems and you're just looking at that, you can make the case that it's a low probability event. But then when you add the HEMP to the CME and then cyber, and then physical attacks. How many special interest aliens have we led in the last 4 years? And then for physical attacks, you add in quantum computing, which is right around the corner in the next 5 years. And then we start talking about World War III and China going after Taiwan and Russia, Ukraine blowing up. There's all these other things. If you start adding up all these separate instances that are all low probability events, I believe I can make the case it's much higher probability that one of these catastrophic events is going to happen in your lifetime than it is for your house to catch on fire. Right? So treat it as an insurance policy. Put a little bit away each month. Be responsible. Be smart. But don't ignore it. Don't stick your head in the sand. Because at the end of the day, the mindset we talked about, it's all about the mindset. And if you have a plan of action after the fact, you're going to be confident. You're going to make wise decisions. And you're going to be much less likely to get your family into an environment where they get themselves killed if you have a plan of action and you've thought about this and you've got some supplies tucked away somewhere.
Good. Mike?
Yeah, I'll keep this brief. I know we're running out of time. We're over a little bit, but just 3 points I want to try to emphasize. In this scenario, if we're trying to be ready for any situation, the first is mental. Having that mindset of I'm going to survive. I'm going to do what it takes to survive. Of course, the spiritual. I'm a Christian, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in helping out our fellow man and doing what we can, and also on the physical end about physical readiness and preparedness. So I would like to emphasize think about wherever you live, whatever geography, temperature, altitude. Think about scenarios that could happen to you. Just because they haven't happened doesn't mean they won't. And just try to develop a basic plan and build on that as you go on.
Yes, I couldn't agree with more. I know on August 9th, 2020, I was on my way to see my first Broadway show at Radio City Music Hall. And I came this close to being stuck under the Hudson when the power went out, and there was in Lower Manhattan. So not only is it you planning if you're at home, if the lights go out, but what are you going to do if you're out and about and something happens? You need to be prepared too for things that could happen. I know if I would have jumped on the train I meant to get on, I was running late. I would have been under the Hudson when the when the lights went out. And so what do you do? And they were out for hours. It wasn't a day or anything like that, but there were a lot of people stuck on the subway systems. The entire Broadway area was with no lights up to the Javits Center. And this is New York City, so you have to be aware that this can happen at any time. And that's what we want to just put out there for you. The possibility is there. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. And with that, I want to thank you. I want to thank you too, Jonathan, Mike, for coming on here and sharing your experience and insights with us today. I hope to have you back soon. Maybe we can touch on some of the other topics that we didn't go into too deeply. But thank you, and you have a great rest of your day. And I think we'll say goodbye from episode 1 of the Grid Podcast.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Maria.
Take care.
See ya.
Jonathan. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for joining.